This is an interesting one, and I want to thank the viewer who pointed out this company because I had not heard of it. This is Ermox X-Fire aluminum frame striker-fired pistol. Pretty neat kit. Tabletop review and field strip coming up next on GBGuns. Inside the box we get this hard case, somewhat reminiscent to a drill bit set or a tool case of that sort. Not lockable, but nice nonetheless, especially for such an affordable firearm. Since I can't mention prices without risk of being shut down here on YouTube, if you want specs or pricing or where I found this, etc., check the pinned comment over at GBGunsDepot.com will be the full review of this as well. Opening up the box, we've got our manual, 2 magazines, 15 round mags. These are Glock pattern. We have 2 optics plates, one of which is precariously balancing the screws that are needed. So pay attention to that as you pull this out. Cleaning kit, which also has the wrench stuck in it for the sake of, I don't know, keeping things aligned. However, mine's a bit bent. If that's an indicator of the wrench, you may want to find a better one that you probably already have at home. This little cleaning kit is pretty cool. It's similar to what I've seen in the Arex pistols. Notice that end is threaded. That's because inside you've got your brushes, your jags, and rods to extend, and that all screws together and fits in this tiny little package. And up top we have an additional set of grips. These are plastic. They would probably be really pretty anodized aluminum, but red set and the black set is what came in the gun. I might swap it to the red just to make this thing really stand out because it is a bit different. And on that note, let me get this stuff out of the way. We'll take a quick look at the manual real quick and then at the gun. I generally look at manuals as an indicator of how much the company cares about the consumer, understanding and enjoying the product. This one is rather simple and seems to be probably translated, which makes sense. Ermo or Ermox or Ermox, not sure the name, is based out of Turkey. There's your specs, but like I said, you want them all converted into American units. You can check out the website for that. Full color photos, which is a nice plus. I did not see any information in here about ammunition restrictions or suggestions. This being a Turkish company, I'm going to take the chance that it's meant for 124 NATO, which is the same pressure as American plus P. So I'm going to run it. We'll find out. Let's take a look at this gun. You can see that we're clear, and with a slide lock to the rear, do we get magazine ejection or release? We get some ejection. Gives it some kick. The magazines are unbranded right where the Glock branding would go, but otherwise metal lined and seem to be very Glock-esque. As far as which aftermarket Glock pattern magazines run with this gun, that will be part of the shooting impressions video. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at this thing. Starting up front, you'll notice that front end is a little bit different. This is not a Glock clone. I've heard it described as that. No, a few things are different on this, and the aluminum frame certainly adds some difference to it. The gun feels rather heavy in hand. That should make for a nice shooter. Plus we've got these lightning cuts on here, although those may be there to compensate for any added weight when you put an optic on it. You can see we've got multiple rail spots underneath. A little bit of a bowl to the nose. Our barrel can wobble a little bit inside the slide, which is interesting because, as you'll see when I field strip this, it's actually tough to get that out despite this being a Browning action. Slide to frame, we have a little bit of side to side and a little bit of up and down. There is some play there, which once again, when I field strip it, you'll hear how tightly this fits on the rails. So that is, I don't know, it's interesting. Alright, front of our trigger guard is textured for those who like to shoot the European style. There's even a little bit of a bump there to help keep the finger on there. You can see that we have horizontal texturing on the front strap, which is exactly how it's supposed to be. The gun wants to rock like this under recoil. This gives you traction. It does not give you traction for the side to side. I'd argue that should help make for a quick and smooth grab and draw out of the holster, since you don't have any flesh getting caught up as you're trying to wrap your hand around it. Controls, we've got an extended magazine release. You can see how far it sticks out there. That is not stiff at all. That may become an issue while holstered. I'll have to find out. Slide release is small, everything's in reach. Notice that the takedown has a button type setup. More on that when we get to the field strip. And we've got a rather fancy looking trigger. Do some trigger talk. Safety works. It's a heavy preload to defeat the safeties and get to the wall, which is heavy but rather crisp. Reset is nice and strong, takes you just before that wall again. It's a heavy trigger, much heavier than I'd expect, and you'll notice that we do have a striker indicator poking out the back. The grips, as I said earlier, are plastic. This shape reminds me a little bit of the Soviet era CZs, not the modern ones, but the original CZs. And I did notice that they have this tail here, which I appreciate for reloads as a guidance point, a spot to smack the mag against as you go forward on it. I am getting Glock 19 size hold on this, in that I'm getting 2.5 fingers and one hanging off waiting to get pinched during a reload. This is a compact firearm. Those smaller than XXL hands shouldn't have an issue, but for me it's a little bit on the short side. Texturing on the back strap, once again, is horizontal as it should be. And slide frame, we already saw there's quite a bit of play there. Fiber optic front sights, green for the back and red for the rear. Nice square notch, and you'll notice they are behind the optics plate. So removing this to install an optic, you will still have your irons, but they're probably going to be a bit short. This appears to be Glock pattern sights. I'm not 100% sure. There's not a lot of information out there about this gun. It is imported by PW Arms in Redmond, Washington. That I found really interesting for two parts. One, PW Arms I didn't think was still in business. They used to bring in a lot of demilled milsurp parts, etc. Apparently now bringing in brand new modern guns. But the other part that was interesting, like one, that they still exist. The other is these magazines are not legal in the state of Washington. So I don't know if they have an exception for that or if they're importing to a different warehouse, but that's interesting. These could also have been a small batch that was brought in and then forgotten and liquidated later. I don't know. Part of why I grabbed this is it was available at one hell of a price. So I couldn't say no on taking the chance. Come over to the right side, no controls over here. Magazine release is not reversible. Next we'll field strip and take a look inside the gun, and that's where you'll see some differences. Now the actual process of field stripping is nothing too different. We're going to check for clear, and then going to release the striker, pull down on these takedown tabs, bring the slide back just a little bit. I do it by squeezing like this, and release it forward. And you hear that? That's what I was talking about with the tighter fit. That's because we have full length rails here. It's kind of interesting. Stamped metal, it appears to be a stamp. No, it's machine. That is a block. Up there is rather beefy and a very Glock looking trigger system. But these full length rails and locking block setup here, really interesting. Appears to be screwed in, which would make sense, putting steel into aluminum. Now on to other added bonuses and why I'm so surprised at the price of this thing. Dual spring metal recoil assembly, which pops right out. And everything is a Browning action, so it of course comes apart like others, but right there, when I get to this part, that's where it wants to hang up. It's almost too steep of an angle, and yet I am flush back here. Just kind of wiggle out and see if I can pop it. There we go. With my hand. Now we can take a look inside the slide, and aside from some dirt from shipping, see, everything looks fairly familiar. It is considerably heavier in the back end than the front. As I said earlier, that's going to probably make for some nice shooting characteristics. We'll find out when we get to the range. The barrel itself seems pretty classic and simple. Next we'll check for chamber fitment. Using some Liberty ammunition. What we're looking for here is how well supported is the brass. You do that by putting a known good quality round into the chamber. Listen for a plunk, kind of like that. Make sure it can rotate freely, which it can. And then we're looking to see how much brass beyond that shoulder is exposed. That's because in the event of a brass failure, bore obstruction, things like that, the brass being the weakest part is going to blow out wherever it's not supported. This tail end of the brass is the strongest part, so we're not too worried about that, but the walls themselves, if that is exposed, that's when you end up with the explosion heading into the frame of the gun and into your hand. This one appears to be fully supported, which is not Glock Gen 3. They don't do that. Reassembly, inverse of disassembly, and while I go through it, I'll tell you about in our shooting impressions video, you will see the absolute first shots fired through this gun on camera. We'll do a full magazine plus one to test these magazines, see how the gun runs that way. Do a multi-mag test. We've got 8 or 9 different aftermarket Glock pattern magazines to see. Gotta hear that. A little bit of grit in there. But once that's cleaned up and lubed, that's probably going to be super slick. See which magazines, how they fit an insertion, does the gun run, and do they drop free. Our trademark What's for Dinner test will run 10 different loads through it of various projectile and case materials and types to see what it'll eat. Take it over to a spinner test for sights and trigger control to enjoy those fiber optics. However, a heavy trigger, but crisp. And then some practical accuracy before giving you concluding thoughts. As I said earlier, for full specs, pricing, etc., as well as more in-depth on my experience, head on over to gbgunsdepot.com or check for the pinned comment. Really interesting pistol. It's red dot ready, which is a fairly recent trend. However, there are some attributes of it that I'm surprised aren't there, like ambidextrous slide locket release or reversible magazine. So it's got an interesting blend. The grip angle feels familiar. I won't know for sure until I'm out of range actually pointing at a target, but neat piece, and thanks again for pointing this out, and thank you patrons for making this review possible. We'll see you on the range.